Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of CX with Chopra, where we talk about everything customer experience. And what is customer experience if we talk about, because customer experience end of the day is, a cumulative effect of all the interactions a customer has, with the employees, with the channels, with the product, how the customer is, buying the product to how they're consuming it, and even post sales. So the cumulative effect of all this is something which creates that customer experience, and that customer experience would eventually help build brand trust, build brand reputation, which would eventually translate into sales as well. But having said that, that also becomes one of the challenges of achieving a unified customer experience, because when we talk about a cumulative effect of all the interactions, then what it also means is that some of those interactions would go outside of a brand's control as well, which is, some of the channels or enterprise which are there in the ecosystem, but not in the brand's control. I mean, like a simple example could be I may buy, let's say, a shirt online, but it gets delivered through a different delivery partner. So my experience is through the end, even going online, ordering it, receiving in my hand, how that delivery experience was, and then obviously using the product and everything. So there are other players as well which are involved. And another interesting example which I really like is, it's like when you create movies, the movie could be great. You would love the movie, but your experience is not just the watching the movie. Your experience, I think, starts from right from looking into the app in terms of what are the upcoming movies, or scrolling through Instagram and seeing what's the trailer for upcoming movie, getting aware about the movie, going to an app, let's say like a Book My Show, and booking the ticket, going to the theater, how that theater experience is when you enter the theater, how the seats are, how comfortable the seats are, ordering popcorn or cola, what are the options which are there menu, and then the movie. So your movie probably could be 70% or 80% of the experience, but there's a remaining 20-30% as well of other channels or enterprises in the ecosystem which will help create that unified experience. So which makes it a very interesting topic, talk about customer experience. And to talk more about it, so today we have Anurag Goel. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Anurag Goel has been a value consulting pioneer, value consulting champion, I feel. He's built value consulting global practices at multiple organizations. Currently, he is the global value consulting practice head at Red Hat. And he's also played that role at Salesforce and Deloitte, and then worked at SAP as well. He's done his engineering from Delhi College of Engineering, did his marketing, MBA in marketing from FMS, Delhi University. So thank you, Anurag. Thanks for joining. First of all, I think we would want to know what is value consulting, and then also, segue into talk about how does it interplay between customer experience.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Arjun. A pleasure being here. Yeah. So in terms of value consulting, right, it's a unique function which transcends different parts of a go-to-market organization. So you look at sales, traditional sales, you look at customer success, you look at marketing, you look at product itself, right? Oftentimes it's very easy for organizations, especially in a B2B motion, to focus inward into how good the product is, feature functions. They miss the point about what does it do for your customer. So that outward looking view, which is end of the day, technology is meant to solve business problems.
Right.
So it's not about you, it's rather about your customer and the business problems technology is solving for them. So this simplistic mind shift is the foundation behind value consulting, because this function emerged 2 decades back, again, focused more on B2B sales, where there was a need felt to accelerate sales deals, focus more on renewals, upsell, cross-sell. All of that happens organically if you start focusing more on the customer instead of focusing on yourself. So that in a nutshell is value consulting, is an in-house army of champions of putting customers first. And there's various manifestations of it with regards to sales deals, with regards to cross-sell motions with customer success and whatnot. So that's in a nutshell what value consulting is.
It's an interesting, I think it also talks about the evolution of, I think, CX, if I may say, in the B2B world. Because especially in the B2C world, I think way back it started with being product obsessed. The product should be great and people will adopt. I mean, for example, Sony Walkman. If the product is great, people will adopt it. But then it slowly moved towards being customer focused, that, listening to customer feedback. What are the customers saying about the product? And that's what I think probably Amazon were the first ones to do that. And now gradually moving towards customer experience. There we are looking at the whole immersive customer experience. That's why Apple invests so much in their store as well. Then when somebody enters in their store, it's the ambience, the how does somebody feel when they enter into that, environment. And what you mentioned, it's very interesting parallel in the B2B as well, that it probably started with being product obsessed in the 90s and something. I think 90s, early 2000s, but now it's more about being customer focused, that, thinking more about adaptability. Now that scale is no more a barrier, now that, I think the marginal cost of achieving, building new platforms is much lower than what it was a decade ago. So the focus is more on value.
Yeah, and products could become commodities very easily, right? How do you differentiate your product from your competition unless you're putting that end customer perspective? So something that I often refer to in these conversations is what Nick Mehta, who's the CEO of Gainsight, founder and CEO, know him for a few years. He coined this equation that became quite popular. Customer success equals CX plus CO. CX standing for customer experience and CO is customer outcomes. Because it is the amalgamation of the entire customer experience, as you put it, along with the objectives that the experience is meant to deliver for you. So going back to your movies example, the customer experience transcends, as you nicely put it, it's not just the movie, but the entire experience. Now, the objective to be delivered there could have been you wanting to have a good evening with your family, right? So the success of the movie will be decided by the outcome that you achieved. So did you actually have a good time in that evening or not? And various factors of the experience will come together to decide if the success happened or not.
And interesting that one thing will complement the other as well. For
That's
example,
right.
if the movie is good, you'll probably eat more while watching the movie, more popcorn, you'll enjoy more. Or vice versa. If it's an IMAX, I would probably go and watch an average movie as well, just for the experience. So very interesting point. But tell me, in the B2B world, let's say, when you're, let's say, talking about value or experience, now in the B2B world, do you also translate that to a B2B2C, that telling them, educating them about how, let's say, a particular product, how any, let's say, an idea would help them achieve, a much greater or elevated customer experience for their end customers?
Yeah, absolutely. During the time I spent at Adobe, for example, a lot of the conversation was, can Adobe's technology, how does it change the world for the end customers of Adobe? Let's say their digital marketing solutions, now called the Experience Cloud. If we are able to personalize the experience for their end customer, right? So that's when Adobe's technology becomes successful. Is if let's say a retailer is using Adobe's technology, but the end customer's experience is improved with the use of Adobe technology. So the B2B success translates into B2C success for the retailer in that case.
But then how do you formulate that value for them? I mean, how do you then define a metric for how that's going to help them improve customer experience? Because yes, end of the day, they're also investing in a particular technology because, I mean, yes, ultimate goal is to increase revenue, but then they also want to build their brand reputation, build that brand brand for themselves. So that would come from, all the experiences through touch points. So how do you come up with that value then for them, especially in the value framework that we talk about?
Yeah. Look, value, I mean, could be either a top line impact, which is around revenue. Now, when you break down revenue, you could look at conversion optimizations. You could look at time spent on a particular channel, right? If you equate time equals money. So there could be different dimensions of revenue. Then you could look at margin improvements, which could be cost reduction. So from a customer experience perspective, if you're able to service your customers better online as opposed to physically calling the call centers, those are typically high cost channels. So the cost delivered of the experience that a brand is having to own on their books, that goes down if those calls are deflected to more self-service channels. So that's the margin impact, right? There's also risk in today's day and age, right? There's a lot of security, compliance, regulations.
Right.
So there's the risk aspect as well. And then there could be strategic benefits, time to market, innovation, right? Those are hard to put a dollar value to, so you can't really quantify that. But those are typically 3 or 4 ways in which you could slice and dice value attachment.
Yeah, I mean, yes, end of the day, there'll be certain portfolio of investment, which will be the bets that you would want to, play. ChatGPT being one, I'm saying now in today's world, like everybody's trying to figure that out as well. But interesting. So are you also seeing any different CX strategies across different regions as well? Like, for example, somebody, let's say in Japan, how customer experience, how brands go about from a tech adoption standpoint, from consumer standpoint would be different from, let's say, an India or a US or a country in Europe. Do you see different patterns are there? And especially for global brands to be able to, let's say a brand like a KFC or a McDonald's, which is pretty much there in, more than 100 countries, let's say McDonald's. Now for them, having a global vision, global strategy, but then being local as well in terms of what the tech adoption is for a particular country. How do you drive certain CX initiatives? So how challenging is that, or what are your thoughts on that?
No, it's a very interesting topic. Having lived and worked in different parts of the world, it is something that I face as a consumer myself.
Yeah.
And then I'm also able to relate to how different brands are trying to adopt and make themselves more aware and relevant in this dynamic scenario. Because going back to the very top of our conversation, end of the day is all about the end customer, right? So a customer in Japan is very different from a customer in France.
Right.
Not just the language that they speak, their tastes, their affinities, their culture, it's extremely different. So to expect a McDonald's to be able to do a rip and replace of whatever they're doing in Japan and do exactly the same in France, it's unrealistic. Because as you said, it's the technology adoption, the maturity will be different, the taste palettes could be different as well. A cheeseburger in Japan may need to be modified based on, let's say, the spice tolerance of the audience that they're catering to over there. So those kind of localization aspects add a level of complexity definitely to delivering an experience. And it's a paradox, right? Because McDonald's would like to have pretty much a seamless experience. I think they're able to achieve that with things which are constant. Let's say the brand itself for McDonald's, the color palettes that they use, for example, right? Those are pretty much the same.
Consistent.
The logos that you see are consistent. Where they're able
would
to...
be similar inside how, let's say, a restaurant is designed.
A restaurant design could be very similar. The menu templates themselves could be similar. The look and feel could be similar.
Right.
But then they are able to do, let's say, 80-20, 80% similarities, 20% is customized or localized for the regional nuances.
And interesting. And for some of the tech players who are into the CX world, who are, helping big brands or helping all the brands to enable this whole end-to-end unified customer experience, like Adobe, Salesforce, some of the other organizations like Google, Amazon. So do they, when they go and let's say talk to different brands and and push for, let's say, their platforms, so do they also talk about different use cases, like you talked about, what are the personalization use cases, how different could be for a global brand like a McDonald's for in Japan or India or US or France? So do they also talk about all the different use cases? Because some of the use cases may not be possible. Some use cases would probably people would prefer more in one country. For example, personalization could be preferred in one country, or in the other country it could be seen as a breach of privacy.
Correct.
So it's very different. It's a very delicate conversation.
Agreed. I mean, it depends on who's part of the conversation. If I'm talking to McDonald's Global, right, they may want to standardize certain use cases globally. But then, to your point, GDPR in EMEA may hamper their personalization efforts.
Right.
If they're trying to do the same in California, because of the relatively higher scrutiny on privacy laws in California, it may become harder for them, again, to have a very, very similar use case delivery in every geography. So there will be that relative localization that will need to happen.
Interesting, because talking about tech, and now if you look at, how it has, I think, evolved or been on steroids post-pandemic, probably it's been one of the most exciting space as well from a CX standpoint, because consumer behavior is changing. So every new customer behavior pattern can be easily seen, or you can catch the pattern on tech, how while observing the people, unlike a CSAT or an NPS, which is more like what happened 3 months ago. You're doing a post-mortem.
Sure.
But whereas using tech, you can observe the customer while they search, while they buy, all those things. And now coming to that, has it made easier for brands to have these conversations, like value conversations? Because now the cost of CX, right? So the cost of CX in the offline world is much, much higher, let's say, in the online world. For example, if I'm a Hotstar, adding 100,000 more users onto my platform, the relative cost would be much less as compared to, let's say, if I'm a restaurant and I have to cater to 100 more guests, or if I'm an airline. And that's why some of these airlines, restaurants, they made those tiers. There's like, especially in airlines where check-in, there's premium, gold, platinum, all those things where customers chooses their own experience, what they want to sign up for.
Sure.
Even in restaurants, there'll be probably a reserved section, or different areas, different restaurants, they would have created those niche. But has it made easier now that the tech adoption has increased, as much as, my parents also now order everything online, they book cabs, they travel. Yes, pandemic would have fueled it, but has it made it any easier now to talk more about value, or are business leaders more receptive to the word value, probably, as compared to maybe what it was 10 years ago, where it was more about maybe FOMO, that we need to invest in technologies, world is moving so fast?
Yep. Yeah, I see both sides of it. On one hand, yes, talking about value and actually showing and delivering value is become easier with higher technology adoption, because value is not just what you promise, right? It is also how are you able to fulfill the promise, and are you able to realize the value for your customers? Because if you're not able to do that, then you will lose customers. Then customer churn will become rampant. In B2B tech, gross dollar retention rates or NRRs, right? Those will have a very direct impact on your ability to actually show value to customers and have those relationships grow over time, as opposed to losing customers and customer churn. So it becomes easier to show and actually deliver and track value from that perspective. But then there's also an interesting paradox with technology about how you have to constantly keep up with technology changes. So you mentioned the pandemic. Even since the pandemic, you can look at how 22 was a lot of focus on the metaverse
Right.
and how brands were trying to catch up to providing experiences in the metaverse.
Right.
And then last year was a lot of generative AI and ChatGPT and whatnot.
Right.
So brands were trying to catch up to providing experiences using those tech innovations. And customer expectations change rapidly, right? The moment I see a new technology out there's a small window for a brand to come in and offer me that experience and delight me
Right.
with that quick technology adoption as other brands play catch up. Now, by the time the other brands will catch up to the technology trend, there may already be another trend in the making.
Right.
So there's both sides of technology adoption, in my opinion.
And it's tricky because while you implement a particular technology and you're thinking about adopting it internally in the organization, think about your customers adopting it, there's a new tech which would have come out by then.
Yep.
So how do you play that game? Then that becomes very tricky. And the tricky part would be to always be talking about value as well. That, but I think on the other side, it's not, it's not like we look at all customers from same lens. There will always be multiple segments of users. Each segment of user would have their own adoption. For example, like I said, I probably started using e-commerce 10 years ago probably, but my parents started using 3 years ago. So there'll be different segment of users, there'll be different strategies which companies would follow. Now coming to that point now, while talking to you, I realize that on one side you talk about value consulting, but on the same in the same sentence you also talk about value realization as well. So is it imperative for, let's say, tech giants in CX to handhold some of these brands in terms of how do they realize value? It's not just implementing let's say a customer a CDP, a customer data platform, or implementing any MarTech tool out there, but it's also very important to make sure that you're using it in the right way or executing it in the right way. So do brands, some of the organization tech in CX do that hand holding for the realization part, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's becoming increasingly important, especially since the economy turned last year and every dollar was more accounted for. So there was that realization where almost every CFO would sit down and look at where am I investing in what technology tools, and then you'll start to strike out some of those technology tools which are not providing value to the company. So you got to make sure that your technology is actually plumbing. It's something that organizations cannot do without. Now, how do you make that perception happen? It is by showing that the technology is delivering real, tangible, impactful value for the organization. If you don't do that, then it's easy enough for the company to rip and replace you or not have you altogether. So again, business value becomes increasingly important because if you're able to reframe the conversation back to, okay, why did you buy the technology in the first place? What business problem were you trying to solve? And if you're able to show to you that we actually understood why you bought the technology, and now we actually helped you solve that business problem, it creates immediate trust, credibility. Renewals become a whole lot easier. Not just renewals, you just created your own case study.
True.
So you're able to build on top of that for an expansion conversation. We're able to upsell, cross-sell more of your technology because you've built that internal trust and credibility.
But the implementation part would be dependent on, let's say, how that organization is structured or what's their trajectory been, what are some of their priorities, what are the challenges that they're facing, which may or may not be in let's say, a CX tech company's control. But they would still do those interventions, like you're saying, I believe, where, asking the right questions, let's say every 3 to 6 months, making them aware of why they bought it in the first place. So they would have got those objectives and helping them in probably like doing some consulting with them and helping them how they can still, in the context of whatever challenge they're facing, still use that tech and enable better experiences.
Absolutely. That's where I draw parallels between the evolution of customer success as a function, right? Nobody knew about it 10 years back. And now almost every SaaS or consumption company worth their salt has a formal customer success function in-house. I see the same happening for value consulting as well. This is a function which is similar to customer success. It is something that touches all parts of an organization's ethos, and it is increasingly gaining a spot directly at the C-level because of the spread it has across different parts of the organization. So it is evolving into a formal function within a lot of organizations, as I see, and I firmly believe value consulting is the new customer success.
So when, let's some of these MarTech, players would go and do they talk about their product? Because again, going back to our whole evolution of how it was more about being product obsessed and then move towards being more customer obsessed, which is the way to go. So do they talk about CX initiatives and how in those CX initiatives, let's say a particular MarTech tool or any CX, tech would help enable that CX initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. That becomes part of the initial discovery exercises, the road mapping, right? That you're trying to, first of all, identify the business problems that the customer is facing with. And then if your technology is actually a fit to solve for that business problem or not. And then how uniquely differentiated is your offering versus 10 other vendors out there.
Right.
So this becomes an integral part of that conversation is, if you are actually able to understand those specific use cases and do a baseline exercise on their current state, benchmark them with what the best in class is, and how are you able to track success over time before or after the implementation.
And also help them map their CX goals to their revenue goals as well.
Yep.
Which is very important. End of the day, what would matter is if it's helping increase the revenue or not. That I believe would be, the key or make or break for them.
Absolutely. A lot of this conversation boils down to people relationships. Because, if I'm somebody who's trying to bring in a progressive MarTech solution into my organization, a lot of my reputation is at stake.
Right.
And if I'm not able to show success that I have brought from that investment to my boss and my boss's boss and ultimately to the C-level, I will not be able to continue receiving funding for that investment for much longer. So internally, I got to understand what are my organizational strategies, and then how are the bets I'm placing aligning with those organizational strategies. And guess what? A lot of organizational strategies, end of the day, they will boil down to either revenue growth target or a bottom line savings targets, right?
Right.
So, because that is how C-suite are typically compensated. So again, value consulting helps technology vendors speak the same language that a champion or an economic buyer would be talking about from the customer side. So it becomes a happy meeting ground because the technology vendor is now making life much easier for me if I'm putting my reputation at stake, but you come in as a true thought partner for me, right? And you're able to articulate topics that I'm anyways going to be asked to deliver on internally.
Right. And that, also relates back to our initial conversation that it's the ecosystem, that partnership between different enterprises is the key for delivering a unified customer experience. So like you're saying, it's very important that all the partners, including the champion inside the organization, to be on the same page, to speak the same language. So I think it's, like you're saying, imperative for all the CX tech players to start thinking about value, talk about that language, and then how it will help translate into revenue or saving cost. So coming to that now, from your experience, so what are some of the common pitfalls in CX transformation? I mean, although CX transformation, I believe in itself is like a relatively new term, because I believe that the whole digital disruption which everybody was talking about has happened. Companies, brands have invested in technologies. They've got platforms out there. Now it's more about transforming customer experience, because now, especially with the growth of digital as a channel, uh, the entry barriers become very low for new players to come in and solve for a particular CX problem for the customers. So, and now brands are facing challenges to transform, like a particular a bank would have to now compete with an Amazon in terms of customer experience, let's say.
Yep.
How would they do that? A big hotel like a Marriott would have to compete with an Airbnb in terms of, because the customer expectations, behavior, they're all changing. So what are some of the common pitfalls you've seen, or challenges in the whole CX transformation which is happening, or how brands are adopting?
That's a great question, and as you rightly said, the conversation has evolved from justifying the need for technology investments. I mean, the pandemic brought it home, where everybody had to invest in technology. There was no option not to. What I'm seeing now is some of the investments have been made in silos, in piecemeals, right? Consolidation of those different technology investments is required, especially from a CX perspective. And it all boils down to a lot of organizational structures. So let's say a large organization like a Disney, where Disney's got so many different facets of their brand. You've got a Disney Plus brand that they have. There's Disney Resorts, there's the amusement parks, right? Now, all of those sub-brands for Disney, they have technology investments, and there is a huge host of customer data that they have their hands on. Now, I firmly believe a lot of customer experience transformations live and die with what you do with customer data that you have access to. As much as privacy laws will allow you to use them, I remember talking to Disney a few years back about how it would be a very delightful customer experience if they knew my affinities from having subscribed to Disney Plus, and if I'm trying to book a vacation with them to go to their resort, how my affinities that they would have been able to notice from my Disney Plus subscriptions, if they were able to personalize their recommendations to me for booking my Disney vacation with them. And then when I actually land at the amusement park, again, there is a lot of personalization. If my son, who used to be a fan of Mickey Mouse at the time, right? If I'm already served a Mickey Mouse themed room when I arrive at the resort, when I enter the amusement park, there's freebies which are again Mickey Mouse themed. So all of that adds to the customer delight.
And for a 5-year-old, it's a memory for a lifetime.
Absolutely, yes. But the challenge that we ran into at that time was Disney Plus was run as a separate entity, and then Disney Amusement Parks was run as a separate entity. There was no data sharing between them. There was no aspect of, hey, can we look at the entire customer experience across these different internal silos? So those org structures make it very hard for true CX transformation to happen.
So there's no dearth of ideas, clearly. It's more about execution.
That's right.
And coming to my favorite question, so that, do you think that companies in today's world need a CX coach? Like a specific dedicated role, which would help maximize, CX initiatives at a global level, rather than, like you're saying, at a local level, like a Disney Hotstar is focusing on their experience, the resorts are focusing on their experience, but there's no unified or a hand-holding of experience from one touch point to the other. So do you think that's the way to go, or you're still figuring it out?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm glad you asked that because I've seen a few organizations who have invested in roles called CCOs, Chief Customer Officers. On the face of it, their role remit is to do something similar. But I've been very bold with making the statement at channels like this, where there's actually a need for a chief value officer role, a role that's directly at the C-suite, because it's not just about value internally that we can receive from customers. You talked about customer lifetime value, right? You talked about NPS. Now, again, those are inward-looking metrics.
What the customer brings to the organization.
What do customers bring to us? who is the single entity who cares about what are we delivering outward to customers? It is very much the value organizations, right? So again, if organizations are really serious about coaching customers and internal teams to focus on CX and customer outcomes, then there is a real need to shake things up right at the top.
So what are your thoughts on, some of the leadership in driving some of the CX excellence, or, either even CX, building teams who are focused towards CX excellence? How do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've enjoyed a lot, is going into organizations which had no presence of business value or value consulting, and building up teams and practices around that. There is a conversation to be had around getting executive sponsorship and investment around this. Again, to my point earlier, there's a lot of it that starts at the top. So whenever I've gone into these roles, I've tested for how serious is the organization to invest in a value consulting role. And let's say at Red Hat, I've been extremely fortunate to have had that kind of investment, where the company is fully behind investing all parts of their organizational functions, right from product to marketing to customer success to sales, technical sales even, right? We are all marching towards a common North Star of customer outcomes. So that is part of the evolution of a good team, a good practice focused on value. Other topics that become relevant are also looking at the impact that you're able to create, because it's a quite a big change for organizations who have been used to going to market with that inward product obsessed view, as you mentioned. Now, if you come in as a bull in a china shop and you're trying to prove that there's a new, better way of doing it, you better put money where your mouth's at.
Right.
So you got to show impact, and you got to show that this is actually working for the company. Going back to what we discussed, has it actually helped increase certain KPIs around revenue and retention rates and contract values and win rates and whatnot? So that's another aspect that I focus on, is showing impact early and often. And that helps in successfully setting up these teams. And the last thing I'll say is people. People will make or break your team. The talent that you're able to hire into the practice, and how well you have a shared vision with them, how you're able to create those high performing teams. End of the day, it all boils down to the interactions they have internally. It's about the experience that they will deliver, internally and to customers, right? So it's I would say a combination of these three factors that, in my opinion, have led to me creating good teams in the past.
Great point. And then, coming to the last question or segment, is that what advice would you give to those young CX professionals who's probably starting out, in this field? So what are the skills that they should go for, or, what would you suggest, what they should prioritize for them to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a couple of skills are really important from a CX perspective. I would say empathy is really important, because empathy means the word itself translates into how you're able to put the other person ahead of you, right? It's not your needs.
Great point, because it's very underrated, I believe, in today's world.
That's
and
right.
It's much needed.
Yep. Empathy, which is also bleeds into your ability to listen and learn and understand those customer needs, because again, those are paramount to your success. Success of your organization, success of any use cases, success of any technology will be predicated by your understanding of those business needs, right? So empathy, listening skills, execution would probably be number 3. We discussed about how, despite the mega investments in technology, if the technology becomes shelfware, if organizations are not really able to execute on those investments, then they will not be of much use.
So I would say those would be my suggestions to CX professionals early on, is to try and double down on some of these skill sets because they will lead to longer term success.
I think that was super insightful and helpful. I a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing, all the insights and the discussions we have had. So thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks.